Hello, my name is Pam Meister, and I'm director of the Mountain Heritage Center here at Western Carolina University. And I'm delighted to be your guide through our women's suffrage exhibit entitled Rightfully Ours, Women's Suffrage in Western North Carolina. This exhibit celebrates the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And it also celebrates the role of the women in Western North Carolina and the pivotal things that they did to influence the state and regional women's suffrage movement. The work that was done by these influential women that you'll meet in this exhibit will continue to have an impact on voter access and education for generations to come. The first section of this exhibit is titled Votes for Women, A Portrait of Persistence, and it's supplied by the Smithsonian Institution's Traveling Exhibition Service and the National Archives. It highlights the struggle for women's rights and some often overlooked aspects of that struggle. The women's suffrage movement grew out of the abolitionist and temperance movement, and while everybody knows about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the actual story is much more complex and involves a diversity of voices and viewpoints. African Americans played an important and active role in the women's suffrage movement. However, because of their race, Black women were not always welcome at white-led meetings and demonstrations. For instance, African American suffragist Ida B. Wells was one of the most important journalists of the late 19th century and early 20th century. At the 1913 Women's Suffrage March in Washington, D.C., she refused to walk in the back where Black women were being segregated. Instead, she joined the parade en route and took her place proudly in the front of her home state's delegation. While early suffragists held meetings, made speeches, signed petitions, and lobbied politely in their parlors and in the halls of Congress, the second and third generation of suffragists took their message to the streets. Alice Paul and Lucy Burns organized the 1913 Women's Suffrage March, which involved 5,000 women, attracted more than 500,000 spectators, and upstaged President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration, which was held the next day. Paul and her National Women's Party were also responsible for the first ever picketing of the White House, which started in January 1917, and despite physical attacks, arrests, and jail sentences, continued daily until Congress passed the 19th Amendment in May 1919. The second part of our exhibit tells the Western North Carolina story, which started in 1894 with the founding of the North Carolina Equal Suffrage Association in Asheville. Just 3 years later, State Senator J.L. Hyatt of Yancey County introduced a women's suffrage bill in the General Assembly, which unfortunately died after being referred to the Committee on Insane Asylums. The Equal Suffrage League gradually lost momentum and ended up going dormant about 1900. Luckily, a decade later, local women's suffrage chapters throughout the state began to pop up again, the first one in Morganton in 1913 and a statewide chapter forming in Charlotte in 1914. Many North Carolina women, both white and Black, were highly influential in the national fight for women's suffrage. Ella St. Clair Thompson was born and raised in Spruce Pine, but moved to Washington, D.C. to work for the U.S. Census Bureau. She served as the National Women's Party's North Carolina representative and as a field organizer traveling throughout the whole United States to establish Congressional Union state chapters. Nationally known educator Charlotte Hawkins Brown was also an ardent suffragist. In 1920, Dr. Brown masterminded a joint effort by the North Carolina Federation of Negro Women's Club, of which she was president, and the NAACP to register female African American voters statewide. She met with local leaders in Asheville, and an amazing total of 600 Black women attempted to register there, although sadly fewer than 75 succeeded due to Jim Crow tactics by registrars. While it was a huge win for women, the 19th Amendment didn't guarantee universal suffrage. African Americans and Native Americans were still often disenfranchised by racist voter registration tactics. The third part of our exhibit explores the history of voting at Western Carolina University. Autumn Chandler, our public history intern, was instrumental in the development of this segment and will tell you all about it.
If voting is the best and easiest way for students to ensure their voice is heard, why not establish a polling place on campus? This was the question that former student Joanna Woodson asked in 2016. With her determination and help from fellow students, faculty, and staff, she created a one-stop early voting polling place on campus. Joanna Woodson also helped with establishing the award-winning Student Democracy Coalition. This organization is nonpartisan and dedicated to helping college students become better informed about politics and their civic duties. Organizations like the Student Democracy Coalition are so important because misinformation is one of the largest deterrents for college-age voters. College students also face challenges with gaining access to voting sites, requesting and mailing absentee ballots, and figuring out strict identification rules. In 2018, North Carolina General Assembly approved Senate Bill 824, which determined acceptable identification for voting. In this bill, college IDs were deemed acceptable if the college went through a strict process of getting them approved. Only 70 colleges had their IDs approved, including Western Carolina University.
Thank you for joining us on this virtual tour of the Mountain Heritage Center's Women's Suffrage exhibit. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that it will raise awareness of the decades-long struggle for women's voting rights, and will help us all remember that to keep democracy alive, we all need to make our voices be heard. We hope that you will join us at the Mountain Heritage Center physically at some point in time, or virtually on our website, mhc.wcu.edu.